and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
It's time for a game-by-game prediction and roster discussion video for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Head coach Shane Beamer put together a pretty good recruiting class in 2025. They had the 18th ranked recruiting class in the country, and even though it didn't have any 5-star players, it had 12 4-star players. So starting on the offensive side of the roster, they were solid here last year, but not great. They averaged at 28.2 points per game. And I think they'll be okay offensively again, but I don't think they'll be good. So Lenora Sellers, their quarterback, is one of the top returning quarterbacks in the country. I really like him. So he played and started in 12 games last year. He missed one game because of an injury, and he threw for 2,534 yards and 18 touchdowns. And he completed 65.6% of his passes, which is really good. And he had a very impressive 8.5 yards per throw average. And he also had 674 yards rushing on 166 carries and 7 rushing touchdowns, averaging 4.1 yards a carry. He had 2 games of over 100 yards rushing. He had 106 against Texas A&M and 166 against Clemson. You can watch this clip of him.
Down by 8. Alabama stalking with 3 rushing. Sellers throwing down the field, jump ball once. Nick Harburg, did he get a foot down? Oh, no, incomplete.
And at wide receiver, Nick Harbour is one of the best athletes in the country. He was a 5-star recruit. He's as fast as you could possibly want a wide receiver to be, and he's at 6'5", so he can catch those highly thrown passes. Last year he didn't have a big year, though. He had 26 catches for 376 and 3 touchdowns, averaging 14.5 a catch. But I think he'll probably be a 1,000-yard receiver this year. But besides him, they're not very good at wide receiver, at least not on paper. And at running back, they do lose Rocket Sanders, who was really good for them last year. But they did bring in a good running back from Utah State, Renzel Faison. He will be the starting running back this year. He's a graduate transfer. Last year he had 1,109 yards on 198 carries and 8 touchdowns, averaging 5.6 carry. And then the offensive line is concerning. They weren't great here overall last year. So they were a lot better in run blocking last year than they were the year before, but they still struggled in pass protection, giving up 41 sacks. I don't think they'll be very good on the offensive line this year, and I think that's really going to hurt South Carolina. They lose 3 out of 5 starters. They do get both starting tackles back, though, and they did bring in 3 transfers that will help them. So now on the defensive side, they were really good here last year. They gave up on average only 17.6 points per game. They were especially good against the run, and I think they're going to take a step back defensively this year, especially against the run. I think it'll be more of an average defense. So on the defensive line, they lose 2 really good players who are off to the NFL, Kyle Kennard and TJ Sanders. Now they get Dylan Stewart back, who is one of the best overall players in at college football. He's a 5-star, and as a freshman last year, he had 23 tackles and 6.5 sacks and 51 total quarterback pressures and 3 forced fumbles and a pass breakup. Here's a clip of him that you can watch.
And the Aggies are moving. Their best drive of the second half. Clock running at 7:11. And Reed's in the pocket, and so is Carolina.
They've got Brian Thomas coming back. He was a rotational player last year, but he'll be a starter this year. And he had last year 23 tackles and 4.5 sacks and a forced fumble. He played in 12 games last year. He's a good pass rusher too. And then at linebacker, it's concerning though. They lose at Debo Williams, who was a really good player for them at linebacker the last 2 years. And then in the secondary, both starting safeties return. They're going to be really good at safety. Jalen Kilger and DQ Smith. They're both third-year starters at safety. And so Kilger last year had 48 tackles and 5 interceptions and 5 pass breakups and 3 quarterback pressures. And Smith played in 12 games. He missed 1 game because of an injury, but he had 37 tackles and 3 pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble. And then at cornerback, they returned one of 2 starting corners, Judge Collar, who had last year 28 tackles and 8 pass breakups. And now for the game by game predictions. Starting with Virginia Tech, I'm done with hyping up Virginia Tech. I hyped them up last year because they returned pretty much their whole team from the year before, and even though in 2023 they only went 6-6 in the regular season and 7-6 with a bowl win. They were really good in the second half of the season. So I picked them to go 10-2, but I didn't pick them to make the playoffs or the ACC championship. But then they made me look dumb in the opener when they lost to Vanderbilt, and then they finished 6-6 again, and then even worse overall with a bowl loss. They finished 6-7, and then they didn't just lose their bowl game; they lost it by 2 touchdowns. I think this will be a competitive game, but I think South Carolina pulls away late and wins by 10 to 14 points. So now at South Carolina State, this will be like a name your score game for South Carolina. They'll put their second string in for the whole second half. And now Vanderbilt. So similar quarterbacks in this game. They're both dual threat quarterbacks. And Vanderbilt, like South Carolina, has one dangerous pass catcher, except he's a tight end. Eli Stowers. He's one of the best tight ends in the country. But besides him, they don't have any pass catchers that are above average. I don't think. And Vanderbilt's offensive line is not very good either. And in the front seven, South Carolina has a better defensive line, but Vanderbilt has better linebackers. But South Carolina has a better secondary than Vanderbilt does, and Lenore Sellers is a better passer than Diego Pavie is. And with South Carolina playing at home, I think they get this win. So now on the road at Missouri. So having looked closely now at Missouri's roster, I think I might have been underrating them a little bit. I don't think they're going to be a great team, and I do think South Carolina's got the advantage over them at quarterback, but I think Missouri's got a little bit better defense than South Carolina does, and I think their offensive line is a little bit better too. And Missouri's Kevin Coleman that they brought in from Mississippi State is a very dangerous weapon at wide receiver. And with this game being at Missouri, I think Missouri gets a close win. So now Kentucky, similar defenses, I think, in this game, and Kentucky's offensive line might be decent, but South Carolina's got a quarterback advantage by a lot, and Kentucky's wide receiver room, I think, might be the worst in the SEC. And Kentucky doesn't really have a good running back, this one will probably be pretty close, but especially with the game being at South Carolina, and I think they're the better team. I've got to go with South Carolina to get this win. So now on the road at LSU, I can't pick South Carolina to go on the road and win this game. LSU has got a line of scrimmage advantage on both sides over South Carolina, and they're better offensively and defensively. I think, and LSU, I know, struggled to stop Lenoris Sellers last year, but with the game being at LSU, I think their defense will play better. And South Carolina's defense, I think, will again struggle to stop LSU's offense. And LSU, I think, has got a coaching advantage too. I think this will be a competitive game, but I don't think it'll quite go down to the end. I think LSU will win by 10 to 14 points. And now Oklahoma, this should be a good game. I think this is going to be a really good Oklahoma team, though Oklahoma's offense was almost non-existent against South Carolina last year. They only scored 9 points, but now with a dual threat quarterback that's also a good pocket passer and what should be a much better offensive line for Oklahoma and South Carolina's front seven probably taking a pretty big step back. I think Oklahoma's going to score a lot more in this game than they did last year. And Oklahoma's front seven, especially their defensive line, I think is going to dominate the South Carolina offensive line. Now, with Lenoris Sellers being such a good athlete, he will make some plays with his arms and legs, I expect, in this game, but I don't think it'll be enough. I think Oklahoma gets this win. So now Alabama, this should be another good game. So with passing, South Carolina has the quarterback they need, but I'm not convinced they have the wide receivers they need. And Alabama has the wide receivers they need, but I'm not convinced they have the quarterback they need. But what Alabama does have that South Carolina doesn't is a top 10 offensive line, at least in the country. I think Alabama will be able to run the football some in this game with Jam Miller. And Alabama has a much better defense, I think, than South Carolina does. Their defense is good everywhere. I think those two things make the difference. And I think Alabama gets the win in a close one, but not quite as close as it was last year. So now on the road at Ole Miss. I am an Ole Miss fan, but I really do think that Austin Simmons is going to be good for them this year quarterback, and he's not going to be short of good options to throw the football to. And Ole Miss, I think, is the better team than South Carolina. And South Carolina, I do think will score a lot more than they did last year against Ole Miss. But with the game being at Ole Miss, I'm going with Ole Miss to get a close win. So now on the road at Texas A&M. So similar quarterbacks in this game. Now, last year when these two teams played, Lenoris Sellers outplayed Marcel Reed by a lot. But Texas A&M has a line of scrimmage advantage, I think, on both sides, and they've got a better defense, and I think they'll be able to run well in this game. And with this being a revenge game for Texas A&M and a home game for Texas A&M, I don't think South Carolina is going to win this game. So now Coastal Carolina. This probably won't quite be a name your score game for South Carolina, but it should be a big blowout win where they get to play their second string the whole second half. So obviously at this point, if my prediction is right, this would have been a very disappointing season for South Carolina. But I still think the motivation will be there for this game against Clemson because if they can win it, they will go to a bowl game. And Clemson, though, I think is going to be very motivated for this one too because it's a revenge game for them. I think Dabo Sweeney will have his team ready to play. And Lenora Sellers' legs were the reason South Carolina beat Clemson last year. And Clemson, though, had the talent last year to stop the run. And I think they'll get that fixed this year with a much better defensive coordinator. They didn't have a very good defensive coordinator last year. And Clemson's got a much better offensive line and wide receiver room than South Carolina does. And I think this will be close. And I think South Carolina will fight hard and this game, but I don't think it'll quite be enough. And Clemson that gets the win, keeping South Carolina out of a bowl game. I've got South Carolina finishing the season 5-7 overall and 2-6 in the conference. And it's not that I think South Carolina is actually a bad team. I think they're a decent team. It's because this has got to be a top three toughest schedule in the country. And that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon. And then they